In their chapter, Feminist Qualitative Interviewing, Marjorie DeVault and Glenda Gross, quote, urge interview researchers to devote more attention to the reception and use of interview research, end quote. Inspired by their call, this presentation is an attempt to, quote, attend to the use of interview research, end quote, as a method for collecting the oral histories of female military service personnel to account for these women's contributions and sacrifices to military and national histories, stories that often go unheard. Over the past 2 years, I've done a lot of interviewing with female and male military service personnel for my dissertation. I've always been fascinated by interview as a method for storytelling and information gathering. Some of my favorite people are incredible interviewers. Studs Terkel, Bill Moyers, Charlie Rose, Terry Gross, and Neil Cohen. In fact, I came to the topic of my dissertation by listening to Neil Cohen's Talk of the Nation.
Well, what's the talk of the nation today? 800-989-8255. Email us talk@npr.org. Stay with us. I'm Neil Cohen. It's the Talk of the Nation from NPR News.
But that's another story. The story I want to introduce was stimulated by spending a day with documentary filmmaker and professor Marcia Rock, and one of the women from her Emmy Award-winning documentary Service, When Women Come Marching Home, Bridgette McCoy. Over lunch, Rock claimed that the video camera, quote, makes the story important, end quote, compelling interviewees to share more because of the camera. Rock delivered this claim after knowing I was conducting my own interviews with Bridgette and other military personnel. I was so taken with Rock's claim, given what I had learned from interviewing female military service personnel, that I asked Marcia to elaborate on her claim about the camera getting interviewees to share more. And here's what she said.
I don't know why, but in my experience, when I turn a camera on to do an interview, it gets the person's attention, keeps the attention, and takes them into a different space than they would be in if they just were talking one-on-one. Now, I don't want to say that the camera's a truth serum, but sometimes it can be that way. One of the reasons I think is that having the camera on makes the interview subject feel important, and that their story has a lot of meaning beyond themselves. And that is a huge motivation and also provides some confidence in telling the story. But it's an interaction between the interviewer and the interviewee. So it's very important to establish trust so that the subject will open up. And I do that in a few different ways. I do a pre-interview where I'll talk to them to find out what their story is and to be able to organize an interview and know where and how to move things along. So there's the pre-interview, but then there's the interaction when you're actually doing the interview, the eye contact, the body language that shows that what the subject is saying is important and that you're listening. The other thing I do when recording an interview is I always try to connect the subject's answer to my next question because it doesn't break their train of thought. That is so key for them to tell their story well. It takes some practice, but what a difference it makes. I do an exercise with my students where I actually have them break and ask a question that's completely on a different subject, and it really throws everyone. You have to start all over again to get that momentum going. So the camera helps a lot, but the way you actually organize the interview and the listening to the answers and connecting their answers to the next question is really, really important.
As I mentioned earlier, Marcia and I share the connection of Bridgette McCoy. Bridgette has graciously allowed me to interview her for my dissertation research, and she was featured in Marcia's documentary. Since being in the documentary, Bridgette has become a nationally recognized veteran woman and advocate for veterans. In the documentary, Bridgette shares a story with Marcia and the camera that she hadn't told anyone for 20 years since leaving the military. But the day that Marcia came to interview Bridgette, she told her that she had been raped while serving in the military. So I wanted to know Bridgette's experience about sharing that much information with Marcia and the camera. And here's what she had to say. Why did you feel compelled to tell Marcia?
When you're digitally telling your narrative to someone who isn't a counselor sitting there taking notes and writing stuff down, or in your mind you're thinking, oh, well, what is the weight of what I'm saying, how is that going to be measured against me later?
Prior to that meeting of her and your house, did you know that you were going to share those details?
That was organic.
No.
It just, the conversation when she got here, it happened. It was good. I feel like it served everything that was said, and how it was edited. I feel like it served everything.
Professor of Journalism and Communication, Kathleen M. Ryan, has conducted oral history research with women from all over the country who served in the Navy and the Coast Guard during World War II. Ryan might interpret Marcia and Bridgette's comments as exemplifying the process of, quote, re-remembering an oral history interview, end quote. According to Ryan, quote, re-remembering affirms one's personal history while recovering one's history through the process of storytelling. And in oral history, the manner of telling the story is as important as the story told, end quote. In other words, interviewer and interviewee collaborate with one another to tell a single story, the servicewoman story. In interview, the story is a collaborative process. And of course, Rock agrees with Ryan. And here's Rock.
What's so interesting about working with the women in service is that every interview was very different. When I was with Alexis, I was in her kitchen and the kids were playing with the dogs and everything, and all of a sudden she started talking about service dogs and how her dog had helped her avoid using drugs, had changed the whole dynamic of her family and given her independence. So I was hand holding it, and I didn't want to stop and break her thought. So the whole interview is handheld, and boy was my arm tired after that. But with Sue and Bridgette, it was a formal sit-down interview, and Alicia too. We had talked, we had chatted a little bit. They didn't know me that well. I did travel to see them, so that made it an important visit. And with Sue, I just asked her, tell me about that day. And I didn't have to interrupt her once. She just told the whole story. With Bridgette, she sort of wandered around a little bit, but then started giving me so much detail that I don't think she told anyone about the rape she experienced and her treatment. And I think I was so overwhelmed in a way by everything she told me that I didn't even hear an airplane go by, so I could ask her an important question twice. So I had to put the airplane in, and everybody, when they look at it, they go, what's that? That's how involved I was in her interview. And Alicia was really terrific and became a really good foil for Sue and really talked about her PTSD in a really important way. And she said, I tell everyone that I have PTSD. In such a really defiant tone, it was a really strong and positive statement. So it was really a great experience. And one of the nice things about service is that we got a grant from Disabled American Veterans, DAV, to tour with the film. And one of the vets went with one of the producers, Patricia Lee Stoddard, and they told their stories again in new and different ways, and boy did they grow from having participated in the film and then talking about it.
Ryan's research with women in World War II also reveals, quote, "Women diminish the importance of their lives. I didn't do anything important" is a constant refrain in the interviews. But concurrently, the women position themselves adjacent to what most would agree is historically significant events. End quote. I asked Marcia what she thought about this. Did she notice women diminishing their service? Here's what she had to say.
Until recently, women have not been allowed in combat, and combat is the most revered part of service. So women tend to put down their contributions because they weren't allowed on the battlefield. That's all changing. But in the film, Lashana served in Iraq. She helped build Humvees and armor them. But she still felt she hadn't really contributed that much. And when she saw a benefits officer, she said she didn't deserve benefits, that people like Sue, who lost her legs in Afghanistan, were the ones who really needed the benefits. And the counselor said, everyone's equal. Your service is equal to everyone else, and you deserve your benefits. So I think women historically do put themselves down, and that has to change because every contribution is a lot. If you serve, you serve, and it doesn't matter if you're on the battlefield or in an office, you served.
Marcia also taught me that people don't tell their stories because they're never asked to share. I think this is particularly true of female military service personnel, past and present. I hope that by sharing my inquiry into the role of the camera in oral history interviewing of women veterans, that you'll be inspired to either ask women to share their stories about their service, or you'll explore the oral history interviews with the women who've already shared their stories, available online at the Library of Congress, Veterans History Project, and the Betty Carter Women Veterans History Project.